Previously on ENCORE. As Mitchell took a step in the grassy marsh, we heard a crunch. We both looked down at the ground. The water surrounding Mitchell's footprint was dark red. We saw a face. The face of a decomposing skull that had been buried behind the theater. Who? When? And why? These are the questions that have run through the back of my mind for the last 5 years. Facts that have turned to conspiracies that have become tall tales with our renters over the years. My name is John O. Davis, and I'm the manager at the Jennie T. Anderson Theater in Cobb County, Georgia. I have a story that's been the theater's biggest secret in years. Only a few are aware. Now we're blowing this door wide open. This is ENCORE, a new miniseries by Jennie T Radio and Cobb County Parks and Cultural Affairs. This miniseries excludes profanity, but it does contain gore and graphic situations that are relevant to the stories being told. If things like murder, conspiracies, and ghosts scare you, then now is the time to change the channel. The views and opinions expressed on ENCORE are those of the narrator and do not reflect those of Cobb County Parks. This is a storytelling, history, and crime-solving podcast and should be viewed for entertainment purposes only. Sunday, April 10th, 2016. Around 5:15 in the late afternoon. I immediately bolt to my office. I run around the side of the building as fast as I can. As I enter through the lobby, Leslie, who is closing down shop, is clearly startled. "What's wrong?" she asks. I can't put into words what I saw. A million things were going through my mind, but I certainly didn't want to make a big deal out of something that could have been described as a prank or a theatrical prop accidentally dropped outside. I pick up the phone and call our security officer. For every rental, it's required that a security officer from our local police department is on duty. It helps with unruly customers or slightly inebriated patrons. Fortunately, this officer, who we'll call Walter, was still on the premises from this afternoon's matinee. When he answered his phone, I probably sounded like an insane person. "Hey Walter, it's Jono. Can you meet me behind the theater? Mitchell and I found something you need to see." Judging by his tone, he likely thought I was being silly or having an anxiety attack. He said he'll meet me back there in about 5 minutes. Leslie, whose curiosity was now piqued, was practically shaking me for answers. I'll never forget telling her, we found something buried behind the theater. I think it's a body." Her eyes got really wide. She offered to come with me, but I asked her to stay in the office in case we needed to call any other county officials. She could meet them in the front of the building and escort them around back. While I was up in the front with Leslie, our boss Mitchell waited behind the building. A little sickened at the thought that he just stepped in the remains of some body, he called our maintenance employee on duty. Caleb, a funny Cobb employee who had worked in maintenance for the last 22 years, was nearing retirement. He walked with a slight hobble. He was often weary from working extraordinarily hard for over 2 decades, but his disposition was always cheery. By the time I made my way behind the building, Caleb was already with Mitchell. I have to pause in the story to explain what was going through my head. My little break from the scene allowed doubt to creep into my mind. Having never experienced anything like this before, surely this wasn't what it seemed. It had to have been a joke, right? Again, the probability was high for it to have been, say, a prop from our renter's production. Maybe somebody dropped it, and the storm from the night before drowned it to where it floated to the surface. I came back to this muddy swamp very skeptical. But Mitchell turns to me and says, "This is going to be serious. When Officer Walter gets here, he's going to need to call a few others. It looks like it is a body." I'm gobsmacked. "Are you sure?" I asked. He was. When Caleb came back to meet Mitchell, not knowing that he was walking over essentially a crime scene, he accidentally stepped on top of the patch of land in question. When he stepped in this puddle, let's just say stuff came oozing out of the ground. The way it was described to me was like stepping on a plate of spaghetti. How's that for imagery? Needless to say, when Officer Walter arrived, he immediately called who he needed to call. There was no question about it. This was not a prop from a musical, nor did it appear to be a prank. It was quite obvious at this point there was something afoul at play. The rest of the afternoon was a bit of a blur, because the more police officers and county officials showed up, the more I tried to stay away from the scene. This was their business, and Leslie and I were there to assist if needed, but the best thing that we could do was get out of the way. We stayed up in the front of the theater, eagerly awaiting direction. Normally, when a performance at our venue is over, we are itching to go home. But not on that Sunday afternoon. We wanted to know the scoop. About an hour later, I need to go home. We hadn't heard from anyone behind the building. We just pointed people one at a time to the site and went back inside. Now, I'm scheduled to be back in the office the next day, so I need to alert my boss that Leslie and I are getting out of there. I quietly walk around back, and now the loading dock is like a circus. Yellow tape has surrounded the area, about a dozen police cars, flashing lights. It was insane. I tell Mitchell we're about to leave, and he nods his approval. Lastly, I ask if they found anything else, and what he told me shook me to my core. He said, "It was a child." Thank you for listening to this episode of ENCORE. This miniseries will continue next week.